Thank you. We're going to have a short panel discussion. I'm here with Ravi Mehta. Ravi is a musician, he's an author, he's a water wizard. He's going to talk a little bit about what he's been doing in the water ledger space. He's got a little presentation. Jerry, who's on your program, could not make it. Jerry had a little accident, I'm afraid. I think he's okay, but he couldn't come this morning. And so we're actually going to have a little bit of time after Ravi's presentation for a little bit of back and forth with the audience. There hasn't been much opportunity for that, and I'd like to have at least 10 or 15 minutes of conversation. So with that, I'm just going to turn it right over to Ravi.
Thank you. Thank you. So I changed my presentation a little bit, knowing that he was going to tell you everything you need to know about water. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about everything you need to know about me. So I'm going to tell you how I got into the water space, and then we could go in a little more detail. And I'll talk about what we're doing. So I have a fund called Flow Capital, and what we do is focus on investing in creating companies that could solve grand challenges. And a company we started a few years ago is called Rise, and we do these global synchronized collective experiences and collective actions, or movements. We call it culture hacking. And our thesis is in an interconnected world, where everything's so interdependent. Individuals feel like they have very little influence on impacting the system, but collectively, together, when we do things in a synchronized way, we have actually more influence than any government, institution, or corporation in the world. So we started organizing these global synchronized collective experiences and movements. Our team has done over 35 of these, and we have 12,000 global city organizers, and we've essentially consistently organized millions of people to show up to places around the world to do something together. This is one of the things we did. We did a global synchronized peace meditation in 2016. This is Mexico City, and this is just one city out of 1,000+ cities that participated. We use technology, obviously. We're a frontier tech investment fund, and we create a platform where everyone can register what city they're going to hold and manage these events. And our audience, the predominant group that's been participating in these are millennials. So essentially, we've had global organizing power. And here are some of the movements we've done. It's Global Peace Meditation. This is London, Trafalgar Square. We've had over 1,400 cities, close to 1 million people, over 88 countries meditate exactly at the same time together on International Peace Day. This is a Global Drum Circle we held right out of Burning Man off the playa. We had over 500 cities participate in a Global Drum Circle that we did. This is International Women's Day Women's Circles. We had 2,200 women's circles around the world participate. This is Austin, Texas. And the thing that struck me the most is when we did Standing Rock. We organized a global prayer 2 days after the water cannon and the battle incident that took place there. And we had over 1,000 cities that participated in this global prayer with us. And it was extremely moving because what our brothers and sisters at Standing Rock were doing were fighting for all of us. And their main narrative was water is life. And that really deeply stuck with me. And I started looking back into water. Now, my background is I'm a civil engineer by trade. My beginning of my career, I started, in my family business where we were building transportation and water infrastructure, in the U.S. So I had a background in water, but not at the level of its sustainability. It was how to get it from point A to point B. So that struck a chord, and after sitting on that for a while, we decided to launch a company called Water Ledger. And we have one of the solutions that we're approaching water is through using capital and capital markets and the market forces to actually reorganize water so it's more efficient and create new supplies. And a little background on water, 97% of the water is salt water. About 3% of that's fresh water. Of that 3%, only 1% of it's really accessible to us through lakes and rivers. This is what rivers look like. They're like the arteries of our land, and that's how water flows. And of the surface water, really a very, very, very small, less than 1% of that is actually rivers. But those rivers support over 50% of our population. So we're really experiencing a global water crisis, and even the banks and the big institutions recognize this. UBS said water scarcity is the defining crisis of the 21st century. And we noticed that in 2018, Cape Town was the first international city to almost run out of water. They came so close, they had day zero, and they managed it very well. And at the last moment, 11th minute of the 11th hour, they actually had rainfall and got their flood. Right now, what's happening is Chennai, a city of 10 million people, 10x times the size of Cape Town, is out of water right now. And this is, you can see the before and after pictures from what it looked like, maybe a year ago to where it's at now. And what happens when a city of 10 million people run out of water? Chaos. So they're still trucking in water, or have a train that brings in water every single day for these people. And the monsoons have been delayed and still haven't come yet. To bring it home a little bit more, Colorado is from a friend who wrote an article in the Smithsonian, Peter McBride. We are running dry. We're less than 40% of our average in the entire basin. And you see that bathtub ring, that's actually 70 feet. That's not insignificant, and it's not going up. So we have an entire Colorado River basin which supports 40 million Americans and a $1.3 trillion economy that is being depleted. So here are the three fundamental problems that we've kind of focused on. One is population growth and urbanization is increasing our demand for water. It's not just the water you drink or flush down your toilet, it's everything you buy, every t-shirt, every product you buy has a water footprint. And urbanization is causing increase in consumption and consumerism. That's an increase in water demand. The second problem is climate change is creating this large variability in our precipitation patterns that's creating unpredictable water supplies. So in California, we went from a 100-year drought to a 100-year flood in 2 years. It's never happened before. The third problem is the established water markets that are here to solve this are not working properly. There's these regional water markets that have been popping up around the world in the U.S., and their intention is to move water from a low value to its highest value, most beneficial use. But we have some laws in place called use it or lose it laws that actually incentivize farmers and others to actually hoard their water and overuse it so they can keep and maintain their water rights. So farmers, how they do this, they they use inefficient irrigation techniques. They use flood irrigation just to maintain their water rights, because that's how the system's designed to keep your water. But if they actually use proven advanced irrigation techniques, we could save up to 70% of our water. Why is that important? If you look at the total allocation of fresh water supply, 80% of it is agriculture, right? So if that's our largest source of water use and our largest source of inefficiency. So if up to 70% of our water is inefficiently used within the agricultural sector, that's over 50% of our water can be used more efficiently. So we don't really have a water shortage problem. We have a water management and inefficiency problem. So what we're doing is we're creating a global water bank to buffer the impacts of climate change and create a more stable water supply for farmers and cities and other groups that need water. So our model is very simple. We buy water rights from those that are inefficiently using their water, that don't need as much of their water that they've been using. We develop that water, and then we lend it or lease it to other farmers and cities that do need that water. So we're using capital to move water from an inefficient use to a more higher beneficial use within the markets. And we're talking about surplus water, supplemental water, we're not talking about human rights water. To give you a sense of how large these markets are, California's Central Valley alone is valued at $60 billion. That's what's reported, not what's unreported. And then there's about $10 billion of water that moves around the markets itself right now. What's interesting is what Peter's been talking about. 20% of the state's energy is actually used to move and treat water. It's a big energy footprint, for water. So there is a very strong nexus between water and energy. One of the other things we want to do, so being in the movement space, we're very good at engaging the public to participate. And the reason why people don't know what happens to their water after they turn on the tap or before is because they don't have really an incentive to. So we're also, ironically, water's been one of the best performing asset classes. It's in the last 25 years. It's one of the most valuable natural resources with finite supply, has a low correlation to the broader markets, and it's also recession and inflation protected. So Citigroup actually thinks water market over time is going to eclipse the oil, precious metals, and agriculture market. But most of the public does not have access to investing in water. So what we're doing is we're actually going to enable the public or others to invest in water by creating a digital share platform that enables them to invest in our water bank, so to speak. So here's a little video that kind of highlights this in a way more interesting way than I just said. And it's just a few minutes, so I'll share that with you.
Water. It covers 70% of our planet and is life's most valuable resource. But how much of this really supports our survival? Of the total global water supply, only 3% of it is fresh water. However, over 99% of that is either frozen or buried deep underground. This leaves less than 1% of our total freshwater supply accessible to us as surface water in lakes, wetlands, and rivers. Rivers make up less than 1% of the total surface water, yet provides drinking water for over 2 billion people and supports over 25% of the world's food production. To put this in perspective, if the global water supply was to fit in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a teaspoon is the equivalent of all the rivers on this planet that directly supports the survival of more than 50% of the human population. However, we're experiencing a global water crisis, and the future of humanity's water supply is at risk, more than ever before. Currently, about 80% of our surface water from rivers is used for agriculture. But population growth and urbanization are creating more demand for our available water. In fact, the World Bank predicts by 2050, we will have to increase our agricultural production by 50% in order to feed the 9 billion people on our planet. This problem is further exacerbated by climate change, creating wider swings in our precipitation patterns and unpredictable water supplies from year to year. For example, between 2015 and 2017, California experienced a 100-year drought and a 100-year flood within 2 years of each other. And in 2018, Cape Town was the first major city to almost run out of water. Today, more major cities around the world are becoming water stressed, making water security a top priority for every country. To help solve this water crisis, regional water markets have been created throughout the world to facilitate the movement of water towards its highest value and most efficient use. However, existing water markets are highly inefficient due to old regulations. Our antiquated use it or lose it laws incentivize farmers to use up all their water through inefficient irrigation techniques so they can maintain their water rights. But if farmers were incentivized to save water, they could utilize proven advanced irrigation techniques that could reduce their water use by up to 70%. Therefore, Water Ledger is launching the first global water bank to buffer the impacts of climate change and water scarcity by creating a more efficient and stable water supply for farmers, cities, and our environment. Here's how it works. Water Ledger acquires water rights in strategic water markets from farmers with surplus water. Water Ledger then uses their proprietary water banking platform to develop and lease that water to other farmers and communities who have increasing water demands. At the same time, Water Ledger is creating opportunities for investors to safeguard our future by investing in our most valuable resource. Water rights have been deemed one of the best performing asset classes over the past 25 years, but most people don't have access to invest in them. Yet the value of water rights continue to rise. Water rights in Colorado have tripled in value over the past 5 years, and similar increases are predicted for California and other water markets around the world. That's why Water Ledger is creating a proprietary digital share platform to give a larger group of investors access to invest in water for the first time, while creating more liquidity for these water portfolios. In essence, Water Ledger is creating a new asset class backed by real water, positioning Water Ledger to be an integral player in this trillion-dollar global water market. Join us in creating a more water-resilient world that safeguards our planet and future generations to come. Water Ledger, investing in the future of water.
Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you.
So we'll have a time for a couple of questions perhaps, but I'm going to kick it off with a question for Ravi. Have you thought much about how one of the challenges with water markets has always been the fact that ecosystems don't have money, don't have dollars, don't participate in these kinds of things. Have you thought much about the way ecosystems can participate in developing water markets, how how water can be recaptured from human use and restored for ecosystem services. Is that a component of Ledger?
Absolutely. Yeah, water ledger, yes. So part of what we do is when we do acquire these water rights, we try to acquire water rights that have environmental beneficial use as well. So it's like in-stream flows and habitat restoration. So we do look at that as a significant component of the types of water that we acquire. There's also a thing that was called the systems conservation pilot that was tested. Even governments haven't figured this out yet. So they tested a thing where the Bureau of Reclamation put up about $12 million to lease water from farmers to put back in the river, in the Colorado River. They did a small pilot, roughly about 50,000 acre feet of water, and over 3 years they were able to do this and found that there is demand that farmers are willing to put water back in the river for a price, so they can monetize that water and use it in a different way. So now there's a group trying to figure out, that program has expired, so we're actually helping and trying to figure out how can we reactivate that with more capital, because really what needs to happen is instead of 50,000 acre feet of water being put back in the river, for Colorado to recharge, it needs 500,000 acre feet of water per year for at least 10 years to recharge. So there's work that we're doing there to see how can we use capital to incentivize environmental benefit and create an economy that's regenerative.
Great, thank you. So we do have roving microphones. I will ask you, because we have so little time, no what my son calls squeeches, no speeches disguised as questions. So questions, and we'll take 2 or 3 maybe, and then we'll leave it there. And so let's start with the woman right here.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Oh.
It's on a little loud.
Okay, I'm wondering, do you have a component of your investment that sets aside, 1% for exactly what they're talking about to, for beneficial uses, if you will, that for the environment?
Great, we'll save it, we'll answer 2 or 3 at a time. Right here?
You mentioned in this decreasing demand for water. I think it was, oh gosh, I'm having a senior moment. A city in Texas, from potty to potable. I met the mayor. Are many communities doing that, from taking regular water to drinking water, or wastewater to drinking water? And you mentioned 450,000 acre feet for San Diego. What's the total demand for the U.S. in water annually?
Okay, thank you. And then we'll take one more in the back, and then we'll come back.
I have a question for Rave. Simplistically speaking, the 2 doctrines that govern water law in the United States, I think I was taught, are called riparian and appropriations, and then each state has its own legal and regulatory framework. So I would like to ask how you are working to transfer water rights, in this kind of a environment.
So, Ravi, you take the first one. And
Sure. Yeah, so actually we're doing a little bit more. Our primary purpose is actually to create a new water supply. Because we have a water scarcity crisis, so to speak. So what we're trying to do is take water that's being used inefficiently, develop it so we could actually repurpose it or redistribute it to those that have a higher water demand and has a more beneficial use. So that in itself is our primary purpose. Embedded within that, there are processes and strategies that we have that actually moves water back in stream, so we could actually move it further downstream to help regenerate fisheries and things like that. There are habitat restoration opportunities that have government programs that we could tie into. But each water opportunity is a deal in itself and has to be handled individually. So 1% is low for what we're considering internally. We're trying to hit a much higher target than 1% for beneficial use.
If I could add to that, a few years ago during an earlier California drought, the state set up what they called a water bank, in which they purchased excess water or water that was saved by farmers through increased efficiency for a price. And then they turned around and sold that water for a higher price to urban users who wanted it. And that difference in money, the profit, if you will, they used to buy water for ecosystems. And they actually set aside some of the saved water for natural ecosystems. So it was another way to let ecosystems participate in a more of a market situation. On the second question, more and more communities are looking at water reuse. We can produce potable water, perfectly potable water, from any quality of water we have now, wastewater, desalination, ocean water. Typically at the moment, we don't use it for potable use. we'll use it for outdoor landscaping, or we'll use it for industrial use, which still saves potable water that we've treated and previously used to water our lawns or to cool some kind of industrial process. Singapore is using treated wastewater for part of its water supply. California is. Israel is recycling 85% of its wastewater for agricultural uses at the moment. In El Paso, they have a wastewater treatment and reuse system, not yet for potable reuse, but as water becomes more scarce, that's a possibility. And I think we will, in some parts of the world, see more of that. And I don't have the answer for the total amount of water the US is using, but some good news on this front. The US uses less water today for everything than we used 30 years ago, despite higher population, despite a growing economy, precisely because we're using it more efficiently, we're changing our agricultural practices, our toilets and washing machines and dishwashers are more efficient. We're actually turning the demand curve down. So there is good news in precisely that area. And then the question about water rights and transfers, Ravi?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there are two types of systems basically that governs water rights in the U.S., the riparian and the other one. And east of the Mississippi is based on the riparian water rights law, right? So that means the states typically own the water in a trust or some site. And there's no private ownership or private access to water there. They permit how much water you can have. So we're focused on the western states where there is actually private access to water, where you could own a water right. And what a water right is, it's really a right to divert water out of a stream when we're talking about surface water. You don't really own the water, but you have a right to divert X amount of water out of the stream, and then you could use it for whatever purposes you're permitted to use it for. Agricultural is kind of the main water right, 80% of it's agricultural. So we're focused on the water markets that exist, instead of trying to create new water markets in areas that are not legislatively set up that way. The water markets have already existed for a long time. We're just coming in and trying to make it more efficient. And that's our purpose. And if it's not us, there are others that are going to come in and try to exploit it. So we're trying to take the lead and set good boundaries and good rules that can incorporate the environment and the other ecosystems as part of how we can actually create a more efficient water market.
Okay, a couple more, and then there's one here and there's one there, and we'll take those two. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see you in the lights here. Maybe we'll take three if they're quick. Here, let's start right here. Raise your hand high.
Yeah, I was wondering what part cisterns play in this. You know, or do cisterns take away from water, or is it a good model for people to have their own water reserves at home?
Okay, right here.
Thank you. Given that it's on the water ledgers on the Ethereum blockchain and you have a partnership program, will you encourage third-party application developers to develop decentralized apps like water quality and measuring flow rates, et cetera, to provide additional data sets?
And one last one there. So while that, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I'm just wondering how you would apply your model to developing countries, any specific ones you've looked at as potentials, and to do it equitably. Ravi.
Thank you for the questions. So on the first one, cisterns, rainwater harvesting, it's a good example of something individuals can sometimes do if the climate is appropriate, if the weather is appropriate, to permit rainwater collection for individual use. It is a piece of the solution. It partly depends on where you are. It partly depends on how big a system you can build. But if you can build a system to capture some local water for your local use, you're reducing the demand on a built system. So, and Ravi, the last two.
Sure.
In the 42 seconds we have left.
Okay, great. So to answer your question, actually, there's another water ledger in Australia that's not us, and I think that's what you're talking about. And they created a blockchain-based water management system. So that's not us. But our original vision of this was to do that, and we pivoted away because our markets are not advanced enough for that. So we pivoted into this water bank model. But thank you for the question. And the question for developing countries. Yeah, developing countries. Once again, we're focusing on established water markets first to get that working properly. And then I feel like if we're able to do that, if we're able to show how established water markets can function efficiently and incorporate all the stakeholders, including the environment, then I feel like we could then export that to other developing countries and create water markets there. But that's further down the line. That's not in the near future for us.
Thank you very much. Thank our panelists and appreciate it.